This is Mike at Woodcraft in San Carlos, and what we're going to do today is a sawhorse. And there's lots of different ways to do a sawhorse. What we're going to show you is a way to take a 2x4 material and kind of just screw and glue some together so that they're pretty good. They may not last a lifetime, but they'll be good enough to allow you to put a door on it, have a work table, and then make better sawhorses or something. They may last a decade, I don't know, but at least you'll get something done. So what we have here are the components. I already cut them out, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but here we have the two horizontal parts, which will be just below the top, and there's a name for it if I can only remember. And then below that, about a foot off the ground, will be this other one. And they're exactly the same, but because of where they are in the thing, they have different names. It's a typical furniture thing. Right underneath the top will be the apron, and somewhere above the floor will be the stretcher. So they're the same thing, but they do different things. And notice that there's a triangle drawn here, right? I didn't do it upside down. And I'm going to make two sawhorses, although today we're only going to assemble one. This is A, and you can pretty much guess what I'm going to put in the triangles on the other one. C, right? Because it doesn't have to be B, it just has to be something other than this. I can put A in the middle of this one and 4 in the middle of the other one, just to be contrary. The point is, it's clear if you're doing two and you have identical components for two, you don't mix them up. So we're going to have a little triangle that tells me this is facing up and facing out. This is the bottom one, this is the top one. This is from one set, and there will be some other signifier inside to tell me it's the other set. So that's what that's about. Also, what we have here are the legs that will be over here. This is going to be going right here, just underneath the top. And this one will be here, right here. Right? You sort of get the sense of it. And just like this triangle told me which is facing up, which is facing out, which is the top, which is the bottom, and all that stuff, this set of triangles does the same. This is up, this is out, this is left and right for set A. So these triangles are a very, very handy way to keep yourself organized, which is the key to things when you have multiple components. Okay? So besides all that, we have these feet. And this is just a piece of 2x4 that I glued little bits on so that when it sits, it does not rest all the way across the floor. It rests on the ends and not in the middle. So on an uneven floor, it won't wobble on something, it will simply go over the top of something. That is why there are feet on many things that rest on the ground. So they can be anything. You can even buy little gliders that nail in there. You can buy a pack of 4 for like $2. This is just some 1/2-inch material I glued on. This is actually the 1/2-inch material I made in another video recently. I cut it up and I used it for this. Anyway, so you can use anything there you want. The idea is to make it so that it only contacts here and here. So I have these feet set up with an A and an A. So that goes there, that goes there, that only goes there, this only goes there, this only goes up here, and this only goes here. So with the triangles and stuff, we have it set up so that no matter what you do, you can turn these around, you can ship them across the country, no matter what, you can make sure that they go back together the right way. Even somebody who isn't really sure what they're doing, as a helper for you, will be able to follow it very easily. And then when we're all done with all of that, that will be the permanent structure that you keep forever, or until it falls apart on you, whatever. Then on the top, we will have a last piece that actually screws down onto that, and that is the part that your stuff will rest on. It will have areas where you can clamp things down, and it's great, but it will eventually get destroyed by circular saws and whatnot, so it's designed to be replaceable. We just literally went over into a corner and grabbed some like scrap stuff out of the bin and cut it up. If you're just doing this from a big box store, you can use a piece of 2x4 left over. It makes it a bit heavier, but at least you only went to the store for one kind of thing. Literally doesn't matter. You're just going to attach it with 2 or 3 screws so that you can remove it later. So that is the overview. Now we have to actually get to screwing and gluing it together. And before I do that, I just want to point out to you that there are many different kinds of screws to use for this kind of thing. Bolting would be even better, but we're trying to keep this simple. For large stuff, they have these things called lag screws, which are okay. It's something that your dad and granddad used a lot of. They can be hard to drive in, especially at the end where they're a little too thick. A modern version that's easier to drive and is stronger is this thing. And this thing has threads only at the front couple inches and none at the back. And this is amazing. This will hold things together. I was just telling a friend here that I use these to bolt a 9-foot tall, 10-foot long bunch of shelving into the ceiling to hold it down. These are good. This is too big for what we're doing here. This is 8 inches long. You would usually want something that is 1, 2, 3. So however deep this is, you want something that's twice that going through if you're screwing it from here. So 1/3 here, 2/3 here. That's the general rule. Timber lock, I think these are called. They're fantastic to know about. For doing cabinetry, there are other things. I think that's called Grex, although that's a brand name. It's got a big flat head on it. It's designed for driving in with an impact driver. It's got a built-in washer, and they're very good for hanging cabinets and whatnot, so they're good to know about. This is something similar to the timber lock, although it's got a very flat head on it with a hex head driver in it. Just examples of many different kinds of screws that are out there. But we're going to keep it simple for you. I just want to let you know there's a lot out there you can explore. If you have, shelter-in-place time on your hands, you can fall down the rabbit hole of screws on the internet. This is, I think, a number 10 in terms of thickness. You want 8 or 10 at least. It is a typical bugle head screw. However, they tend to act like a wedge as they go in and can split your wood. So if you're going to use a bugle head thing, because that's what you have lying around, put a washer on it, and that changes it to act more like this flathead thing, and it doesn't tend to split your wood so much. So we're going to use regular bugle head screws with washers to get this done, because that's kind of whatever you have lying around is what you're going to do. Okay, so regular screws, or that's maybe 3 inches. 1, 2, 3. That's about 3.5 inches. A typical male thumb is about 1 inch wide. 1, 2, 3.5. Now you know. Who needs a tape measure when you have a thumb? Okay, so I'm going to put those aside. Bring over, I actually have a grab bag of all sorts of long screws lying around in my bags we're going to use. So that's 3.5, typical 3.5. Different metals even, I don't care, just whatever works. Some of them have different heads on them, so you need different driver bits, so organize yourself accordingly. And the last thing is, while you're driving such large screws, you want to make it, 2 things will make it easy for you. One is to use an impact driver. You really want an impact driver for this. And the other thing, especially if you're not using an impact driver, is to have like candle wax lying around. This is a typical everyday paraffin candle, or at least it was. And what you do when you're driving screws is you drag them through the candle and you get some of the paraffin wax on the screw. And as it goes in and heats up, it acts like a lubricant. And it does wonders for getting screws into difficult spots. Old timers would use soap. But soap, by its very nature, is it's caustic, or at least it's some sort of reactant to grease. And I don't like to have too many chemical processes going on inside the wood. So paraffin wax is inert; it's a neutral. Okay. So what I've done before assembly is I've marked out on these where connecting parts are going to go. So there's all sorts of alignment marks that are a little subtle to be seen in the camera. But on this piece, there's a center line down the middle that matches a little center line marked there and there. So I can put this on there and make sure that it is not crooked or off center. By aligning it to that center mark front and back, it will be where it needs to be and not crooked. And there's also a center mark along here and a center mark that way. So once I have that done, I can actually locate it in the right spot. So that's a very quick way to get it done. Does it need to be that well aligned? Not really, it's just a sawhorse, but it's really good practice to do it. So when you have to do it for real, you have some practice. Now I also have here a horizontal line that matches the top of the stretcher. The top of the stretcher is going to hit here. And there's of course the center line there so that the stretcher will not only be at the right height, but it will not be twisted in any way. And I'm only marking the top because I only care about the top of the stretcher. This is 2x4 material. I have no idea if it's square. So I set the top always, so the top will be parallel to the floor and always the right height. The bottom of that 2x4 may not be parallel to the floor because it could be something weird, but I don't care. I only care about the top. Because we're using this commonly available, cheap, kind of lousy stuff, which is construction 2x4s, right? It's good for construction. It's not good enough for furniture usually. So we have some things to deal with. So here's a giant knot in here. And I would have been better off buying more wood. It's like $3 for an 8-footer. I would have been better off buying one extra 8-footer if I could have cut a piece that did not have a giant knot in it. That would have been better. So what I did here was not a good idea. I did it for you, to show you that it's there, and so we can talk about it. I'm going to do it anyway. The other thing is when you're doing screw and glue or nailing, you do not want a knot at the very end. This is another horrible disaster waiting to happen. If I don't pre-drill for this properly, that it will actually split out when I drive in the screw. Much less likely if it's just regular end grain. That knot is troublesome. So it's better off to blow another $3 on another 2x4 to get rid of that. So no knots near where there's any connecting, and no knots in a load-bearing area. Okay? Now if I used it upside down like this, it would have been structurally disastrous, because as you sit on it, this will open up and crack. But this, you sit on it, this will tend to close in. So even if you're building a house and you have floor joists and ceiling joists, if there's something like this on there, you're allowed to use it, but it's got to be on the top side. It's also why if you're going to drill holes for plumbing, you can only do it from a certain point up on the top side, because when it flexes, it goes into compression, making sure that it's strong. If it's down here, it goes into tension and will fail. So avoid these at all costs, but if you end up with one anyway, put it on the top side, not the bottom side. And avoid knots on the connecting parts. That was ill-advised on my part, but again, I did it for you so we could talk about it. The screws to come in and out the right spots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center back here. I'm going to hold this in my hand and go like this. Turn it around, do the same thing. By not moving my hand as I did it, this is the same distance in from either side. So the center is in there. So when I drill holes for the screws, I know that I won't be out of place. Okay. So the other thing is, there's the center mark right there, and I'm looking at the center mark on this side, and I know that this is not aligned with it, nor that. So I'm going to do that, and that may not be perfectly centered, but it's very close to centered, and that in construction is good enough. Okay. So I can drive 2 screws knowing that I will be pretty close. I can even do this if I'm unsure of myself and I don't have any confidence. You can kind of do something like that, which gives you a kind of image of where the 2x4 will be on the other side. So when you're driving or drilling holes for the screws, you have some sense of confidence. Okay, so I now know the safe area for drilling the holes. I'm going to be using a screw like this, which is going to come up through here and in like that. If I had longer screws, I would use them for this. Aha! I do have longer screws, so I will use these ones. And it uses a weird bit, but I think we'll get away with it with this bit. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to drill pilot holes in this piece, because what I want is I want the screw to grab into the end grain here and pull it down tight. The screw does not actually need to be biting into this at all, and can actually cause trouble if it is. So we need a screw hole that is plenty big enough. So I have a big tapered bit here. It's about the same diameter as that. Pretty good. You don't need to be overly cautious and make a drill bit or pilot hole that's too small. It's a classic way to split stuff. Now I can do this and drill a hole in the bench. Who cares? It's just a workbench, right? So a workbench is designed to be used, but it's not designed to be damaged. So I'm going to make sure that when I do this, that I do not actually drill into the bench. And of course, this is also not okay. People have done this. People do this all the time. It's nice to have your hand directly opposite of the thing you're pushing. I don't know how many people end up in the emergency room doing that kind of stuff, but don't be one of them. The emergency room is very boring. So I'm going to get it like this. It's safely hanging off the edge of the table. You know, I have it aligned. You can tell right away if I do it crooked. You can see from there. That's crooked, that's crooked. That's good enough. But the other thing is, you can do this too. So since I'm fairly close out to the edge, I'm going to actually cheat. I'm going to tilt it a tiny, tiny bit, so it's going to get, this is exaggerated, but I'm going to do this to some small degree. That means it will be a little bit further away from the edge on the vertical leg. So we're going to use the drill for drilling. We'll use the impact driver for driving. How crazy is that? Okay, so we have the two holes in this piece. We'll set this aside. We're going to grab this and get that started in here. Notice I have it up off the table, so I might damage my sawhorse, but I won't damage the work table. The sawhorse is designed for taking abuse. The bench is designed to not take it. Whoops, that worked. Okay, so this one's just poking through. This one, make sure my hand is out of the way. Whoops. So they're both sticking out like a couple of millimeters, or 32nd to you Americans, in case this goes international. So I got that there, and I got this here, and if only I had a workbench that had any kind of a holding device. My goodness, that would make this so much easier. And you're gonna think like I'm cheating. So let's see. Again, is this going to add any real strength to the job? Who knows? But in general, it does help, and if nothing else, it will seal the end grain. If you do what I just did, make sure you don't drag your finger across those tiny protruding screws. Now, since the protruding screws kind of were less helpful than I was hoping, I'm going to back them off so they're not even touching at all. Okay, so here we have that center line. That center line. And this center line. Of course, the glue makes it want to wiggle all over the place, which is irritating. Impact drivers require eye protection, but also hearing protection. That horrible sound. Make sure your fingers are not underneath there, because if you pinch your fingers in there, it's gonna leave a mark. Notice I didn't even bother to do any countersinking or anything like that, because it's a Sawhorse and I've got my two pads there, so when I do that, those two screw heads are not hitting anything. One more reason to have the pads. So there's a bunch of glue, and you can leave all that glue where it is because it's just a Sawhorse. However, you can also take your special shop accessory here. Okay, so we have that one, and we have this one. Okay, so we're going to take a stretcher, or we're going to take or the apron, one or the other, and do that. So let's see. That is the stretcher, and I can't remember how to put it together. Do I put it like that? No, because if I can see the A from this direction, I should see the A on the other one. Okay, fine. Well, if I see the A right side up on this one, I should see the A right side up on that one. Okay, so that's it. That's how they go together. That's the only way they go together, and if you don't lose track of it, it will go together the way you intended, which is great. So that's going to go there, right there. Okay. So the screws are going to come in from the other side. So again, we're going to have to take something and mark that center line on the other side. If I didn't do it already, I did it already. Aren't I smart? All right. So I had it marked on the other side so that I have a sense of where it's going to go. So get my drill, and I make sure I do not drill into the tabletop. So I'm drilling into this space right here. I'm deliberately making sure that it is not, repeat, not drilling into the table. Okay, that is the contact side. That's good. So this side, this is going to be the side that has the knot in it. And I'm as close to the edge as I dare get. I've made stuff like this that I expected to last 2 months and have lasted 20 years. So they could be with you for a while. So spend a few minutes when you're at the big box store or wherever you buy these. Spend a few minutes and you know, cherry pick nice boards. Why not? All right, so we got that there, got that there, and in a perfect world, I would have that supported the same way. Right now, I have what? I have my paraffin candle underneath that, just to get it close to the same. Okay, so that I'm going to align the top of the apron with the top of the leg. It's very important that they be exactly almost perfect. Don't worry about it. You thought you knew.
Go for it.
Okay, so we have the partially assembled thing. We have this sub-assembly ready to go. We're just going to use the floor itself as a base. And all I need to do now is line up this with this. I'll use my digital alignment device here. So this is now aligned to my height marking and my center marking. That's very, very important. All right, everything else is just academic at this stage. A sawhorse that is not perfect. That dropped off a tiny little bit, so it is not aligned perfectly. But that is a minor point with a sawhorse of this nature. And I don't want to stress it or wiggle it while the glue is drying in case the glue ends up adding any kind of strength. But that's pretty rigid right there. Very, very strong. But this is the permanent part. You can sand it, you can varnish it if you want. It helps keep it from looking ugly. Also, if you're going to get the glue and stuff on it, the varnish helps you put wax on it, which helps to keep the glue from sticking. So, we're going to put a sacrificial top on it, and what this is going to do is absorb damage, which will allow you to throw it away and put on a new one at a later date. Okay? So, we don't want it to be crooked, but we don't want this to be fussy either. So what you can do is wrap your fingers around there and you can feel, right? I can feel that it's flush with this side and sticking way out that side. So I'm gonna wiggle it back and forth until I get two knuckles of my finger equidistant. So that is centered in that direction enough. Then I'm gonna center it here. This is about 3.5. This is about 4, so there's a little bit of an overhang here, which I did on purpose to hide any slight mess-ups. But I'm not going to do it anywhere here because the screws are already going in from the other side, and I don't want to hit one of those screws or anything. So I made sure to do a countersink right there. So that's about 2 or 3 millimeters below the surface. Right about halfway. But remember that giant knot we were dealing with? I don't want to go into that knot, so So I drilled one in so that won't slide around. Then I did the other 3. Now, normally I only do 3 holes, but because of that knot, I can't do one in the middle, so I'm going to do 2 over here, 2 over there. So one more way that the knots complicate things. If I stand here like this, that's the height I want my working height to be at. So I measure from the floor to there. And then I subtract 1 1/4, and that gives me from here to the floor, right? Then you subtract that, which gives you the top of the leg, and then you subtract all this stuff, which gives you the bottom of the leg, so you can figure out how long this should be. So how long this is, plus all that stuff you add on, will determine the working height. And there's no correct height. Sometimes you want a low bench for some stuff, sometimes you want a very high bench for detail work. But somewhere around this height is good. You can see that this bench is at about, wrist height for me. So that's normal, okay? So this happens to be 27 1/4, this leg, because this is 3/4, this is 1 1/2, and that's a 1/2 inch, and it all adds up to 30 inches in my case. And 30 may not be ideal for me, but I've made a lot of sawhorses, and I make them all 30 so that if I lay out a whole bunch of stuff, everything's at the same height. So for better or worse, they're at least consistent in height. So that's height issues, and we can give you dimensions for all this, and you can just copy this. It works pretty good. Unless you're very tall or very short, in which case you've got to go like this and measure from there to the floor, and then do the subtracting math to give you the length of this. Now this distance is also arbitrary. I had students who wanted to make them quite narrow, but the closer you get them, the less stable they are in this direction. So you don't want them to be too narrow. But if all you're ever doing is supporting a 4x6, then you don't need them to be wider. The reason I do this is because this is a 24 3/8, 24 1/2, something like that. I think it's closer to 24 3/8 at this stage. But I buy a 24-inch hollow core door, and I can lay it across 2 sawhorses, and then I have a work surface a foot off the floor where I can put a almost finished piece of furniture to sand it or work on it, so it's not all the way down on the ground, or it's not way up on top of the table. So it's good for an assembly table height. This distance here happens to be about 14 inches. 15 inches I'd prefer. I originally did them in 18 inches, and I kept kicking them. So these are irritating. There's no way around the fact that these are irritating, and you'll kick them a lot. But anyway, I now have 2 extra sturdy ones, and there's nothing fancy about them. It's 2x4 material.